What's up, YouTube fam? This is your girl, Lauren Denise, host of This Too Shall Suck podcast, a fresh perspective on grief. Maybe you've been here or maybe not. Either way, welcome or welcome back. On this episode, we're going to be talking to John Burnett. He's a middle school counselor, and we're going to be talking about the grief of childhood trauma. So that childhood trauma that you didn't even know was childhood trauma, or maybe you did, but that one that is causing you to act the way that you're acting and has seeped into your adult life. Or maybe you're a parent who wants to connect further with their child and doesn't know the signs to look for or wants to know if your child is going through any childhood trauma. We're going to be talking about that. Or if you have a child who has been through some trauma and you want to know some resources or some tricks or some tips to be able to help them through their trauma so it doesn't seep into their adulthood. Either way, whatever your reasoning is, it's going to be an amazing episode. I'm so excited for you guys to hear it. Make sure you leave a comment at the end and let me know your favorite part, and you enjoyed the episode. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back, my loves, to another episode of this Two Shall Suck podcast, a fresh perspective on grief. I am your girl, Lauren Denise, and I am really just glad to have you here. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. If this is your 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 27th time here, welcome back. Thank you so much again for joining me on this journey. So today we are going to be talking about children and grief, childhood trauma. So this guest who I'm going to bring on is someone who I'm really close to, who I've known for a really, really long time. He's basically like my cousin, like when we grew up together, and you can't tell me he's not my cousin. So, but he works in the mental health space as far as with children. And so I wanted to bring him on to talk about it. And what I loved about our conversation is that not only did we talk about because my goal to bring him on was to talk about childhood trauma, for just specifically children, like how do you deal with children who are grieving and things like that. But the conversation got so much deeper than that. We were talking about how it can carry on and manifest into your adulthood. And if you're a parent and you have children who may be experiencing some trauma, how do you work through that? And, what it looks like, how we grew up and how we were not able to express ourselves, more specifically in the Black community. So it was a really, really good conversation. I cannot wait for you guys to hear. You all know I love to give you some type of statistics or just some type of fact when it comes to whatever conversation we're having. And so, again, y'all know, if I'm looking or if you see me looking over here, if you're watching me on YouTube, I'm looking at my other screen to tell you the statistics. I could have wrote it down, but I have another screen here. So I'm just going to look over here. So that's what it comes to. So this is actually coming from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, or NCTSN. And so it talks about the different types of trauma types, which there are several different types of trauma types. So it's not just, people think about childhood trauma and think about the really big things, right? Like the physical abuse or sexual abuse or, all of these things. But this breaks it down into so many different trauma types. And so I wanted to go through the different trauma types that children can experience that can, eventually lead and manifest into your adulthood and what that looks like. Or if you're a parent, the type of trauma that can happen and what you can look for in your children. And so the different type of trauma types that they discuss here, bullying is a trauma that they can go to, community violence, complex trauma. And so again, that's pretty much what people think about is like, kind of some things that are just really deep, right? That's really complex. And so complex trauma, disasters. So natural disasters can cause trauma in children, hurricanes, the flooding that happened with Katrina, all of those things, blizzards, droughts, extreme heat, windstorms, snowstorms, anything like that can actually cause trauma in a child. And then early childhood trauma, this is a trauma that typically refers to a traumatic experience between the ages of 0 and 6. So that's what they call early childhood trauma. Intimate partner violence. So they said this can also be described as domestic violence, but it occurs when an individual purposely causes harm or threatens the risk of harm to a past or current spouse. So when kids see you and your spouse or you and your significant other arguing, and they not necessarily, it may not be like physical, like per se, but they see it happening and it's really affecting them. So that is intimate partner violence. There can be medical trauma. So pediatric medical trauma stress refers to a set of psychological and physiological responses of children and their families to a single or multiple medical events. So when kids are going to the doctor all the time or going to the hospital all the time, that's what that's referring to. It's not necessarily referring to like a doctor doing something or touching a child or anything like that. It's the response to them being in and out of the hospital, or I don't want to say hospital, being in and out of the doctor or being sick all the time. Physical abuse, of course, you know what that is. Refugee trauma, enough said. Sexual abuse, again, we know what that is. Sex trafficking, obviously, is a form of trauma, terrorism, and violence. And so, unfortunately, we live in this ridiculous world where people are shooting up schools. So that can happen, or just seeing the terrorism that's going on the news if their parents are watching it. And then that type of violence, shootings, bombings, anything like that, that can cause a trauma in life. And then it just says a traumatic grief. So many children adjust well after death. Other children have ongoing difficulties that interfere with everyday life and make it difficult to recall positive memories of their loved ones. And I actually had a conversation with a friend today, and he was telling me that he had lost so many people in his life at a young age, before the age of, I think he said 17, excuse me, by the age of 17, that he doesn't even remember some of them, which I like, of course, to me, I'm like, what? Like, how can you forget like your friends? But like now looking at this and understanding that that is a grief, like it's your way of like processing. You were so young and you just kind of like move forward, and death doesn't affect you in a certain type of way. And so we actually had a conversation about that of about normalizing death, but like compartmentalizing it as well. And so I think I'll have that conversation on another episode, but like looking at this and understanding that there's so many different levels of trauma that can happen in your childhood that we just don't acknowledge or that we don't know. And then we move forward into adulthood and we wonder why we have these ridiculous relationships, or we wonder why we can't connect with people, or we wonder why we get irritated so quickly, or we wonder why we blow up, or we get depressed, or we disconnect, or insert whatever it is that we're going through mentally. It's because there's so many different traumas that we didn't even know were trauma, or we didn't acknowledge as children. And I think it just goes back to, and John and I talk about this as well. I think it just goes back to our parents did the best that they could, and they only know what they know, right? And back then it wasn't a conversation to go to therapy. It wasn't a conversation to go and get help, or to, create those safe spaces to say, hey, I'm not okay. And maybe that was your situation. And I hope that if you are listening to this, maybe your situation was, and you're like, Lauren, like we always had those open doors in my house. Or when I told my parents something was wrong, they offered therapy. Like I really do hope that was your ministry, but for a lot of people that was not, that was not their reality. And so again, like looking at these traumas and then thinking about us as adults and having to work through all that, and why mental health is such a big thing. It's because we have all of these traumas that have I guess I'll say manifested into our adulthood, and caused the things and the ripple effects that have happened in our life. And so I'm really excited for you all to hear this conversation with John, and for us to just talk about so many different things. Like we talked about a lot, but we were just like, we barely scratched the surface. Like this could be a whole nother episode. So I might bring him back on another episode, later on to dive more into it, because I'm sure you guys will have probably some more questions. But it's a really, really good conversation. And so we're gonna get right into it in just a second. All right, guys. So I'm excited as always to have my next guest on. I know this guest for a long time. We're like cousins, basically. I mean, honestly, we're like cousins. I thought we were cousins growing up until like somebody told me that we weren't technically cousins, and I'm like, we're cousins. So I was gonna say, I'm like, thought we were
Close
like
enough.
for real. Right. I was like, I thought we were like there was no like not connection there. So I'm super excited to bring him on. I'm gonna read this bio real quick and we're gonna get right into it. John Burnett was born in Memphis, Tennessee, but currently resides in Houston, Texas. He has 10 years of experience in education and mental health, and currently a middle school counselor. He received his bachelor's in Spanish from the University of Memphis, master's in school counseling from Cambridge College, and a principal certification specialist degree in school administration from Freed-Hardeman University. He enjoys building bridges and making connections with students, families, and teachers, and hopes to continue to make a positive impact in the community and world. He specializes in coping skills, mindfulness, grounding, and helping students work through trauma, anxiety, and stress. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my cousin.
Hey, y'all.
John Burnett. That's my horns right there.
Oh, okay.
You know, like the DJ.
Hmm.
That's my DJ right there. He's like, he don't deal with my foolery. That's how you know we related. He don't. He's like, okay, Lauren.
Well, you have to do your own sound effects.
Okay. I feel judgment in that statement, but that's fine. We will take it. But I'm glad to have you on. Like I said, I wanted to bring you on to, talk about that childhood grief, childhood trauma, and how
Yeah.
that can, manifest into adulthood. My friends and I talk about it all the time of just childhood trauma that they went through and never really
Mhm.
rectified. So I can
Yeah.
imagine you being in middle school, seeing the trauma that happens in school, seeing all types of stuff. But before
Oh
we get
yeah.
into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about your journey with grief, because I think it'll kind of shape how you got into the field that you got into. So if you don't mind, just sharing a little bit about your journey with grief, so people can understand that.
Yeah, of course. So me personally, I've been blessed to not have to go through a lot of grief. Like I can't even count. I can count on how many funerals I've been to in one hand, thankfully. But I also looked over grief, and grief like can be. It doesn't have to be a loss of a loved one. It can be so many different things. It could be a mourning of a relationship or friendship, change of employment, any major big thing that happens to you that's taken away or changed can be a part of grief. And so for me, a couple years ago, before I was on the right track per se, but my life was kind of falling apart. And so it started with me losing employment, like a major source of employment. So I was like, okay, well, let me go back and start waiting tables or doing something to kind of take care of myself. But it was a shock. So I was out of work, doing the best I could to take care of myself. And then at one point, my mother got sick. And so she was hospitalized and she had a brain hemorrhage. And they didn't think she was going to make it. And it was literally out of nowhere. I remember how it hit. Like I was at home on the couch sleeping and I heard screaming and I went in her room and saw that she was unresponsive. So of course we called the
Mhm.
paramedics. They came, the ambulance took her away. When we got to the hospital, I was one of the first ones there, and they were just like, "It's not really looking so good. We're gonna have to do an emergency surgery." And they was like, "Do you even want us to do it?" I was like, "Oh, yeah. Why do you have to ask?" And
Yeah.
so I'm like, "That's a dumb question." Like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And so they did the surgery and it was successful. But then it turns out the next morning they had to do another emergency surgery because there was still so much blood that was on her brain. And so, long story short, they did it and they was like, well, we don't know if she's ever going to come out of it. We don't know if she's going to make it. She's in a coma. We don't know how long it's going to last. Typically, these people don't come back from these. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to have to be prayerful. And it was about honestly the time frame bleeds so much down because of like blurs my memory. But it was at least she was in a coma for at least a month, 2 months. I can't remember how long it was. But that was just a really hard time for me because it's like there were so many things that were left unsaid, a lot of anxiety and stress from worrying about like what's going to happen. Like, you know, unfortunately, things were not in order in our family. So, you know how that can add stress. When someone doesn't have a will and where they don't leave things together for their children. It's like it was so much that was going on at the time. And here I am thinking I'm handling it well when I really wasn't. Didn't even realize I was depressed. That's how it hits you. It's like, depression can be like a long-term thing where you're sad and
Mhm.
you don't even realize it. And so it just
Mhm.
started helping like it was affecting like all parts of my life. Like I wasn't able to function. I wasn't able to work and like focus and do the things that I needed to do. I went down some like really dark paths and like did some unhealthy coping skills. And so, long story short, eventually I got out of that funk and built some stronger connections, started going back to church, and then got better. But that testimony helped me understand like what grief is, how it can be different for other people, and what I can do to support other people. Which is why I'm glad I'm in the field that I'm in now.
No, I love that. That's good. I
Yeah.
remember when all that was happening.
Whew.
I was like, Miss Dean, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Like, no, that ain't because I mean, her and my dad, same way, just loud,
Mhm.
just fun people. So I feel like it was a really weird time for the whole family at
Yeah.
that moment. Like, cause we just all just didn't know. Like,
And it just was there was no onset of it. It was literally like she was fine the the day
Yes.
before, and then it
Yeah.
just hit out of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the scary part about it, but
Mhm.
to your point about, like, not having any of that stuff done, like, if y'all haven't listened to the first episode, this very first episode of the first season, we talked about estate planning
Mhm.
because it's so important because
Oh, yeah.
same thing with dad. I'm still in the probate process. He died in 2019. I'm still in the
Wow.
probate process, like, because he didn't have any of that stuff in order, so I'm not gonna preach on that, we're gonna continue on, but if y'all are
Mhm.
looking at YouTube, y'all see me looking at y'all,
Mhm.
and if you're listening to my voice, get it done.
Oh,
But
yeah.
no, that yeah, but it's almost admirable that you went through this yourself and decided, "You know what? Like, I want to kinda get into this field and be able to help people because of something that I went through." Because you could
Yeah.
have just taken that, went through it, move forward with your life, right? But you chose to take it and say, "You know what? Like, I went through this and I wanna be able to help people get through that." And so I kind of want to talk about that because you could have taken it and maybe gone into counseling for adults, but instead you decided to work with children. Was
Mhm.
there something specifically that made you take that route, or you just kind of fell into it?
Well, honestly, I'd already had my degree in school counseling years before, and it took me a long time to find a job. It's like those are like the unicorn jobs. You don't People don't use those. They don't leave them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I started going into mental health first. So I became a family intervention specialist with youth villages. And with that job, I was able to go to families' homes and help do like de escalation, communication, like rule setting, helping them, like,
Mhm.
put boundaries in order for families. And
Oh,
so I
wow.
learned a lot about coping skills and mindfulness and just different things to help people through that job. And I actually carried all that over into my school counseling career. So I always say God has a plan. Like
That's right.
that, that was a reason why I was in a school counselor first and why I went to mental health first. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That was probably intense.
oh
Going
yeah,
to people's homes.
you just have no idea that some of the stuff that you see because they're comfortable. They're in. I'm a guest in their home, and so I come in. I'm like, what is? Okay, you have to ignore it. You have to be professional, and it was a learning experience, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So like it says here on your bio, you talk about some coping skills and
Mhm.
mindfulness and grounding and things like that. So a question that I had, I was actually talking to a friend right before this and I was telling him we were going to talk and he's like, I need you to ask him this question. I'm like, sir, you are an adult, but it's fine. Um he grew up and he had a lot of loss around, a lot of death. He grew up
Mhm.
in, as people say, the hood, and a lot of people died around him.
Yeah.
He lost a lot of people as a child, and he's like, how does that affect? Because he has kids now, so he's like, how
Mhm.
does that affect your mental status that you've seen in kids? I'm not sure about like like what area you work in as far as
Yeah.
like the area in school, but
Oh, yeah, it's
you
I
know,
work in the same area, yeah.
you do? Okay. All right.
Same one, mhm. So,
Yep,
I
sure
know
do.
what you're talking about, yeah.
Right, exactly. What have you seen or what is some ways that you can that you share with your students to kind of cope with that? Because clearly it's
Mhm.
manifesting into his adult life at this
Oh,
point,
yeah.
right? But like how do you, as a young age, what are some techniques or some things that you help with those students who are going through things like that?
So that's a very complicated question, so Imma break it down in parts. So I wanna touch on childhood trauma because you mentioned that, and it's really important to understand that trauma in your childhood is more than just physical abuse or sexual abuse. It's emotional neglect, like if you didn't feel like you got the love that you needed from your parents or guardians, if they were
Mm,
detached. There's so many different things. Actually just did an Instagram live on this recently on this topic, but it includes family separation, community violence. So if you grew up in a community where there was gang violence, which you could say your friend experienced, but all of those things can carry over into your adulthood and can affect your mental capacity, your emotional capacity, and even your social capacity, because people tend to withdraw and stay to themselves when they've experienced a lot of trauma. A lot of times they're very irritable, annoyed easily, and most times they don't even understand where this came from, but it usually stems from unhealed trauma. And so I always say, in order to like heal from that, there's a couple things that you can do. One, you have to actually process what happened. So that's the hardest part for people, is actually sit down and say, what happened in my childhood that has possibly bled over into my adulthood life. And so the first thing I would suggest that he do is look up ACEs, ACE. It's called an adverse childhood experience. And so that's where they define what are these childhood trauma events that look, what do they look like? And if, that person is experiencing some of those traumatic events, then they can actually start putting two and two together to like get help that they need. But for me, like working with children, like especially with grief and loss, like grief and loss is not my strong point, but my coping skills are. And so I teach them like mindfulness techniques, like a lot of deep breathing things to do in order to get themselves back recentered. Um, Grounding, which is mainly just like using your five senses to focus on something else. So, like for example, if I'm looking around the room, like naming five things that I see, and not just like the obvious things, but like really focusing on the detailed things or things that you wouldn't notice. For example, like behind me there's a tree, but
Right.
like within this tree there's a lot of different brush strokes and gold, and I actually never realized there was gold in this painting. But you see, that's the thing. It's like the big thing is when you're experiencing something drama, trauma, or grief, or anything that's heavy emotion wise, you just like focus on something else. And so mindfulness, grounding, exercising, like all of these things can help, build your mental capacity in order to get over grief.
Oh no, that's really, really good. That's
Hmm.
really good because I've heard about the what is it, the 5, 4, 3,
Hmm.
2, 1 method.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've used that before,
Hmm.
in myself of like, okay, I gotta calm down. Like, what are 5 things I
Hmm.
could see, smell, touch, taste, all of
Yep.
that, but never like really diving into it. Like you said, like, okay, I
Hmm.
can see a tree or I can see this, but
Yeah.
like really getting into, oh, I can see that is like a little crooked, that like branch.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's really, really good. And I think that's a good point that you just taught me, that to go more into the detail because
Hmm.
it'll bring you, it slows down what's happening in your nervous system, which
Yeah.
is, it's all connected all in here. So no, that's really good.
And I teach combinations of those two. So of course I teach deep breathing. That's a big one, but I also teach deep breathing and the focusing on those five senses. So like for example, get to a place where you're comfortable. Like what do you feel? Like what are you sitting on? Like how does the chair feel? Like what is the texture of your clothes that you're wearing right now? Like all those things, and then take some deep breathing exercises while you're doing that, and they work.
Oh, no, that's good. Yeah, no, that's
Mhm.
really good, and I can imagine for children,
Yeah.
because 'cause they're always just, like, going, 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 going,
Yep.
you know? And so another thing I wanted to ask, I have some friends who, their child has had some loss, like, maybe have lost a
Yeah.
parent or something like that. Um, what do you say to those kids, in that moment? Because 'Cause they're young. I think
Yeah.
my friend, her daughter maybe, like, 3 or something like that, and her,
Mhm.
dad passed away. And so, she's of course living her life. She understands that knows that her dad is gone, but I
Mhm.
think she is concerned about that as she grows up and what that looks like. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that you've seen, like, obviously because you work in middle school, like you've seen them now to like, when they've gotten older, but what are some things that you've learned or that you've seen from maybe a child who has lost a parent or
Mhm.
grandma or somebody close?
Mhm.
Some ways for them to kind of help aid in the healing process as they're growing up
Yeah.
so it doesn't necessarily fully bleed into their adult life.
Yeah, so I've worked with elementary age students up from kindergarten up until like high school. Like I don't have a whole lot of experience with high school, but I've like tapped out at middle school, like, so eighth grade. But I use a lot of books. So children respond well to
Mhm.
books. So if you can find like a really good author and like read stories that relate to grief, that's always a good one. I'm trying to remember the name. Okay, I think it's Julia Cook. And Grief is like a Snowflake, I believe is the book. And I've used that one before. And but it's really important for children to have an outlet. So one, of course, like having them be able to express their feelings, validating their experience and their feelings at all times, even if they're having a hard time, like teaching them the language how to advocate for themselves and say, I'm not feeling my best right now. That's a big thing. It's like communication that's open. And if you continue to do those with those coping skills, I'm not gonna say that, like, it negates everything, but it does make it easier to transition.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Like you said, validating their feelings, creating that
Mhm,
safe space for them to do that.
mhm.
And for them to say, "Hey mom, hi dad, I'm not okay." I
Yep.
think that's important because I will say, like, growing up, I'll say specifically in the Black community, that wasn't a thing. Like, we
Yeah,
weren't like, "Hey, that made me feel some type." That wasn't a conversation in my household.
exactly.
It just
And think
wasn't.
about us as adults who have who suppress our feelings even in friendships and relationships because we don't know how to do that and because we didn't grow up expressing our feelings that way. And like I was listening to one of your earlier podcasts and I was just saying how like I was really thinking about that conversation with you and your friend. I was like, one, this was miscommunication, but where does
Yep.
miscommunication come from? It
Yep.
comes from not being able to express your feelings the way that, when you're experiencing them. And it feels like, not being heard. And so, like I was saying earlier with that emotional neglect, those are big parts of that. Like when you're a child, you have to have an outlet to where you can express yourself and do it in a respectful way, but someone has to teach you how to express it in a respectful way.
Right, exactly. And I actually just was talking to a therapist about that. Like, we our parents didn't know what they didn't know, right? And they
Yeah.
learned it from their parents. And so like
Mhm.
now our generation is like, yeah, this is a bit too much.
Mhm.
We would like to go to therapy, we would like to become therapists, we would like to try and figure out like what's going on here. So
Yeah.
we don't have to pass it down continuously to our children the way that's been passed on to us. And so I don't necessarily fault them, but like you said, at the
Yeah.
same time, I I can't come to you and say like I'm not okay because that's not a normal. Because how do you know that to create that safe space,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Um, and so I want to talk about that a little bit.
Mhm.
Obviously I'm black, you're black. The black the black
Depending on what
community.
day of the week it is, people think I look
Oh,
Hispanic.
okay. They do think you a little and then you up here getting degrees in Spanish. So I mean, you know what I
Yep.
mean? So one. So
Yes.
but do you see, because I know like you said you work in a different area, do you see, I hate to like generalize this, I don't want to say like more trauma in like, you know uh, the younger black community than like other communities, but do you think because of just being black in America, that compounded with everything else is going on, do you think it makes it harder to push through the trauma, or do you see that it can weigh on them a little differently because of just what we have to deal with on a daily basis?
Well, and that's a very complex answer too. But my demographic for my kids, I work for in a sixth through eighth grade school,
Mhm.
and 90% Hispanic, 10% Black. And
Okay.
so I can say that honestly, it's the same in both communities from my experience, for what I've seen. But it's that don't ask, don't tell. This is what's going on in our home. We don't talk about it. We don't
Mhm.
share those things. And so again, if you're not able to express what's going on in your life, or if you don't have an outlet to express your emotions and your feelings or grief or all those other things, it can weigh down on you and it affects your decisions. So one of the biggest things with unhealed trauma is like if you're not taking care of that, it's going to manifest in a different way. What that looks like, it could be overeating, addiction to food, drugs, alcohol, sexual promiscuity. There's so many different ways that like people use things like unhealthy things to cope with the things that are going on in their life. And so again, it's like if you don't talk about those things openly, and most times kids don't even know what to talk about. And so that's helped me to really like dig deeper and build relationships and connections with kids so I can actually like read between the lines when they're telling me stories.
No, that's good because, like you said, kids, they're just like, I don't know what this feeling is. Like, I
Mhm.
just don't feel good. I just don't feel good.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to say that I don't feel good. So I want to talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit. Like you said, the
Mhm.
don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah.
Because there can be times, I'm sure, that you've seen where kids are in a situation and
Mhm.
they may, I don't know, maybe they want to like, have a better relationship with their parent or something like that.
Mhm.
Like it may be a relationship with the parent. Like, how do you even handle that? So I want to come
Mhm.
from it from two angles, like from
Okay.
you like talking to a child and how you can kind of maneuver that, and like from a parent who may be listening and maybe does have a weird relationship with their child for whatever reason.
Mhm.
Like, how do you kind of soothe or smooth over that situation?
So with children, I always tell them that you can only control what you can do, and you can only
Mm,
control the things that you say and those things. And so a lot of kids will come to me and say, "Well, I don't know how to talk to my mom. She doesn't listen, or he doesn't listen because they've always
mhm,
got their phone in their hand, or they're always working and tired." And so I always tell them, like, "Have you tried at least writing them a note?" So the positive thing with the note is you can
mhm.
write them a note expressing what you feel in a respectful way. Put it in a place where you know they'll see it, and then let them read it, give them time to process and let them come back to you.
That's
And so a lot
beautiful.
of times they'll try that, and then if that doesn't work, they'll tell me. I always tell them all the time. I'm like, look, I can give you suggestions for things, and I can help you talk through it. But at the end of the day, if you try and it doesn't work, it's not going to hurt my feelings. I've got something else I can work with you and show you.
Right. Right. No, that's good. That's good. And from a parent, hopefully, there's no parents listening that, are going through that with their children, but they may be. They may be. Hopefully, what
But
do you say to the parents who are?
But even with that, like, parents have to really understand their own, like, grief and trauma and things that they've carried over into their parenting. That's a big thing. Like, there's a lot of unhealed trauma in parents. Like you said earlier, our parents did the best that they could do with what they had and what they experienced and what they knew. But a lot of them didn't have the tools they needed in order to pass down to us. And so that's the same in this generation. A lot of them grew up with unhealed things, unhealed trauma. And so they're trying to parent the best way that they know how, and they just don't know how to do it. And so the
Yeah.
big thing is like setting some time to like really build a relationship with your kids. So when I talk to adults, I always tell them, look, if you haven't set some time, just take them to do something. It doesn't have to be something expensive. You can take them to the park and just walk around and just talk to them and ask them how their day was and genuinely be engaged. That's a big thing. Kids need that connection. They need to know that someone is in their corner listening to them and really caring about what's going on. And so funny thing is, the other day I was walking down the hallway and this boy randomly was like, he's like, "Are you a dad?" I was like, "No, I don't have any children." He's like, "You don't have any children?" I was like, "No." He's like, "Well, you seem like a dad to me." And it's like the little
Dad
things like
vibes.
that. He's like, "You really make me feel like you're my dad in a good way." And I was like, that really made me feel special because he's telling me over the course of this year, he's told me some of the dynamics between him and his own father and him and his mother. And with me being the person who's neutral, who can just listen to him and don't give him advice and not tell him this is bad or whatever, and not, just literally come up from a place that I understand what you're going through. How does
Yeah.
that make you feel? Like, I try very hard, and I don't judge anything that they tell me. I always tell them, feel free to come to my office and just say what's on your mind. You'll hear the craziest things, but I don't let it show in my face. I don't let it show in my tone or my body language. I always just tell them, I comfort them and I help them like think through what they can do in order to be better.
Yeah. No, that's good. Oh, you make me feel like my dad. Pumpkin.
It was really sweet.
Pumpkin. I know. I'm like, oh, pumpkin. Oh, adorable. So I think you kind of touched on this a little bit.
Mhm.
But and I've talked to again like people who say that they're getting to that middle school age because we know like between
Oh
elementary and
yeah,
middle school, it gets
it's a
something
shift.
weird. Yeah, something weird happens there. I don't
Puberty, children's opinions. It's so many different. I could write a book.
listen. I'm like, it's like a switch goes off and you go from
Mhm,
here to crazy. And it's like,
mhm.
what just happened? Like you was just my
Yep,
little boo. And now I'm like, just
yep.
wanna, real quick. But how can a parent look for or see some signs of maybe anxiety or depression or something like that? Because I've had people say like, oh, my child said they were depressed, and
Mhm,
how can they be depressed? I have this life for them and this, that, and the third. I'm like, well, first of all, that's not probably the best way to handle it, you
mhm.
know but how can they and again, I think you kind of touched on this by having that open relationship, but is
Mhm.
there some other ways for parents to maybe recognize these things that are happening
Yep.
in their child?
So the big thing again is like advocating or validating their feelings. Another big thing is like looking for small changes or even big changes in behavior, like appetites. Have they stopped eating or eating too much, or like are they sleeping a whole lot or being withdrawn, not wanting to like hang out with the family? Like what are some things that have changed recently in their behavior? Those are big things to see. And the biggest thing that I can say for parents and guardians is like, again, depression, anxiety, stress looks different on everybody. And so you can't my biggest thing is I always tell kids, I can't tell you how to feel and you can't tell me how to feel.
That's right.
No one has the right to tell you how something affects you or how it makes you feel. And so
That's
if
right.
if parents and guardians really understand that in the beginning, that can help shape. Because there's things that they could come to them and say, well, this is what's going on, mom, dad, this is how I feel. And the parent or guardian be like, well, why is it a big deal? That's a big
Mhm.
no-no. You don't want to invalidate their feelings. You just listen without judgment and just like try to understand.
Yeah, create a safe space. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, that's just what it comes down to is and I've
Hmm.
told some of my friends this. I'm like, you cannot be when they come to you and say they're depressed, you can't. So
Yep.
maybe let's talk about that. How do you and maybe it does come down to that
Hmm.
trauma. Is not when your child comes to you and and maybe or y'all have a conversation and they're like, I'm depressed, I have
Yeah.
anxiety or whatever.
Hmm.
How do you besides like, validating their feelings, how do you not feel some type of way about it if like you've given them this good life per se, right? And they come to you and say,
Hmm.
"Oh, I'm depressed." Like, how do you like combat that your own feeling about
Yeah.
that?
So it takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of growth. But the big thing is, I wouldn't like respond to that question. I would just ask, okay, so what does depression or what does anxiety look like for you? That's a big thing.
That's
So
good.
having them name what's going on. And again, that could look like them saying, okay, well, people don't like me at school. You know, people don't understand the dynamics of school have a huge impact on the way that our children feel and the way that they go through life because they spend so much time at school. It's like us as adults going to work. If we're not
Right.
happy or if we're in a toxic environment, it affects how we feel. It affects
Yeah.
how our actions are. The same way with kids. And so the big thing is just listening to them and asking them questions like, I'm trying to understand you. So tell me why you feel that way. What's going on? If you can name, what are some of the things that make you feel that way, or what does that look like for you?
Oh, that's really good. No, that's good because
Mhm.
I don't have children, so I wouldn't. You know what I mean? But
And
I
it,
would definitely
yeah.
wouldn't invalidate their feelings.
So like if a child comes to you and say, "Well, I have a hard time sleeping at night," that's anxiety. That's insomnia. Having too much on your mind. And I was actually watching a YouTube video not long ago. It was a church sermon where this lady, I forget what her name was, but she was preaching about depression. And she was
Mhm.
basically, she hit it from a standpoint where even I, as a mental health professional, didn't think about it that way. But depression is sadness from like a long-term point of sadness or unhealed sadness. And that just like it
Mhm.
never gets healed and it turns into something bigger. So it might be something small or it might even be a big event, but that not being healed now turns into depression. And then
Mhm.
you move on and it's just that change that doesn't change, it doesn't go away. And so like regret, people don't understand regret like can lead to depression. Like regret,
Mhm.
long-term sadness, all of these things because those are small feelings that turn into something bigger. And so that's why I always tell parents or guardians don't ever invalidate what your children tell you. Like you really have to listen to them even if you don't agree with it. So even if you say, "Well, I provided you with this and this, you have a good life," that does not necessarily mean that they don't have those feelings.
Oh, that's good. No, that's good. That's really good. So, for a parent who may be listening, who may
Mhm,
want to put their child in therapy because they may see some things going on or they may have behavioral issues or something like that,
mhm.
do you obviously, they're a minor and, you can do what you like, but do you suggest maybe gently, kind of having a conversation or just like, we need to go to therapy, let's go to family therapy or whatever the case may be?
Honestly, it depends on the relationship, and it also depends on how it's presented.
That's
So you
fair.
can't go up to somebody and say, "You crazy, I think you need to go talk to somebody."
Right.
Automatically, guards are gonna be up, and
Right,
so
right.
it's like it really depends on how it's presented. And so whenever at a school setting, like when I call a parent and suggest outside resources or therapy, the way I present it is this: Johnny's going. This is what Johnny's experiencing at school, and I don't. I go a very general standpoint, like because I don't for confidentiality reasons.
Of course,
But
yeah.
I always say, this is a difficult age for some, and as a school, as a counselor, I'm only limited to what I can do. I don't do provide therapy. It's more like short term interventions for kids. I would highly suggest, taking little Johnny to go talk to a professional. You can first start with your pediatrician if you don't have any like ways to go to a like a therapy or therapist, or you don't know who to reach out to. Start with your pediatrician first. Tell them what's going on. Tell them what the school has recommended or what the school have observed, and then go from there.
No, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Because I think, again, some people get into the mindset of like, okay, this is my child. This is what I'm going to do. You need
Yeah.
to go talk to somebody. And I feel like the child just won't be receptive to that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I feel like you have to create that relationship first.
Yeah.
Obviously I would hope you would have a relationship with your child, but create that relationship, like you said, and, you know, try and ease them on in, like, hey, we're gonna go talk to this person, because I just want to make sure you're good. So
Or
that's
even
really
stand from of saying, "Look, I don't have the tools to help you. I know that you're going through something, but would you be willing to talk to someone who can help you?"
oh, that's
So
good.
that's the big thing. Like if you're humbling as a parent or guardian, then just say that. Like, I don't have the resource, I don't have the skills or tools to help you. I know that you're going through something, and I don't want you to grow up and feel X, Y, and Z. Like, it's really important to get this under control now. So would you be willing to talk to someone?
Oh, that's good. That's really good. Like you said, humbling to
Yeah.
yourself. So I think again, I think our generation is changing a little bit, but definitely old school generation,
Yeah.
humbling. No, I'm the mama, you the
Oh
child.
yeah.
That was it. That was
Mhm.
it. And, hence why we are in therapy currently. So,
And honestly, realistically, I just had this conversation with my mama, what, 2 years ago. She told me, she's like, "I'm the parent." I'm like, "Yeah, I understand that, but let me tell you how this affected me. I'm also an adult at this point now. I'm not gonna be disrespectful to you, but I'm also gonna tell you how it is." And
correct.
so
Correct. Exactly. Like, that's great. But as an adult, now I
yeah,
understand the things that happened to me as a child,
exactly.
how they rolled into my adulthood. Thank you.
Mhm. And it took a
I hope.
long time for me to get over that. A lot of
Mm,
that. Like, I read this really interesting book, by Doctor, what is her name? It escapes me, but it's called Emotional Neglect. I'll remember it later, but Dr. Janice Webb, that's her name. And the book is called Emotional Neglect. And it was a really good book, and it
oh my
gave
god.
like examples. I'll share it with you later. It
Okay.
just gave examples of emotional neglect, what that looks like if if you had a parent that was maybe narcissistic or didn't pay you attention or show any type of affection to you, and how it manifests in your life as an adult. So, like, again, people think of abuse as the big things, like the physical, sexual, all those, but there's so many other types of childhood trauma and neglect that people experience and don't even realize it. And a lot of it is unintentional, but it still has an effect on you.
Oh
And it was a
yeah.
really good book. It helped me understand some of the things that I was going through, and like helped me understand like why I was annoyed or irritated constantly. Didn't even realize that that was a function of childhood trauma.
Insert Lauren. Got it. Okay.
Hmm. I
Because
mean, it's
my friends
real.
are like, yeah, I get annoyed. I don't get like angry easily, but I do get
Hmm.
annoyed very quickly.
Annoyed,
Very
irritated. Yeah.
quickly.
Hmm.
Quickly. I'm like,
Yep.
you're annoying me and I actually don't want to talk anymore. And it's
Mhm,
quick too. And I'm just like,
mhm.
okay, like, and I just move forward. I'm like,
Yep.
that's probably a problem. Like, you shouldn't be able to just like do that like that.
And part of that too is like if you've been a person, like I know I can personally speak from my experience. I used to push stuff under the rug a lot growing up, to where like as an adult, sometimes you'd be like, okay, this irritates me. I can deal with it. So I'm just gonna put it
Hmm.
under the rug and leave it alone. But that doesn't
Hmm.
heal it. You don't get better from that. And it shows up in other ways.
Right.
So
It doesn't go away. It's still under the
mhm,
rug. And one day the
mhm.
rug gonna get pulled up and then
Yep.
everything that's gonna come on out, all the dirt,
Yep.
dust, and everything else is gonna come under there. You're gonna be like, great.
And I
Now what is
actually
it?
use that example with kids too. Like I draw a picture, like I use art too. I draw a picture and like I put a bomb in someone's heart. And I always say, look, what happens when you continue to get irritated or annoyed and you don't handle it? And they were like, okay, and they share. And then I said, what happens with a bomb when you lit that fuse? Eventually it does what? And they like, it blows up. I said, that's the same thing with us. So if you ever have one of those anger outbursts or you like don't explain, you just kind of black out and you do stuff, it's because other stuff has been building up. You haven't dealt with it, and this is the result of it. So I always teach them, this is how you name your feelings. This is how you take care of yourself in the moment. And this is why you prevent stuff from building up so it doesn't happen like this.
No, that's good. That's really, really good. I like the
Mhm.
bomb in there because it's
Mhm.
real. Because it'd be a
Yep.
bomb ticking,
Oh, yeah.
ready at any moment. Okay.
Mhm.
But my last question, because
Mhm.
I mean, God, you just had dropped so many just wonderful things. For someone listening to this, I always like to ask, like, what is the biggest takeaway, for someone listening about whether it's their own childhood trauma or,
Mhm.
maybe people who have children and, what do you want the biggest takeaway from this episode to be when they listen to this?
One, I want you to be gentle with yourself. Understanding that the things that you experienced and went through, even if like they were like even some of your actions were your fault, the things that happened to you were not your fault. And so in order to heal from that and move forward, you have to do the work, to do the self work, to first identify what are some of your triggers. What are the things in your childhood that, even though you can't change them, what can you heal from? Forgive the people that you need to forgive and move forward. And I always tell people forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you. And even with kids, I show that example. Like I'll draw a picture of a kid holding a bottle of poison, and I always say, "Oh, what happens if they drink that poison?" And then they tell me, and I say, "Oh, that's the same thing with unforgiveness. If you keep that unforgiveness in your heart, it's like poison. It's not hurting the other person; it's hurting you." And so when
Mhm.
kids see that kind of example, it's like they think, like, "Wow, this is something I probably do need to do." And so I always say, like, identify what's going on, seek help if you need it, heal from it, and or even take the small steps you can do on your own that's inexpensive to move forward, like exercise, move your body, get 8 hours of sleep at least, and then drink plenty of water, and just do those deep breathing exercises. Those are the things you can do in the short term.
No, that's good. That's
Yeah.
really, really good. That's good. Be gentle. Y'all know I always say,
Yes.
be kind to yourself and give yourself grace. Because if you
Oh
don't,
yeah.
who will? And I mean that.
Exactly.
I mean it. Because I've had to learn to be kind to myself. Because I used to be
Hmm.
so mean to myself all the
Yeah.
time. Like, and I still struggle with that. Like, I just struggle with it.
Hmm.
Like, I have a perfectionism complex that I've
Yeah.
had to work through, had a whole episode about, but it was because of things that happened in my childhood. Being rejected in
Hmm.
my childhood caused me to have this complex of wanting to, like, no one can ever tell me that I'm not enough, because of
Hmm.
that.
Yep.
But and it manifested for me being mean to myself at the same time. So
Yep.
yeah, that's some good advice. But thank you so much, Boo, for
Of
being
course.
here. I appreciate you. If they want to connect with you, let
Mhm.
them know where they can connect with you, because y'all need to follow him on Instagram and TikTok, because he be having all the TikToks. And I'm like, I can't keep up. But they
Well,
are so good.
so my social media channel is for TikTok and Instagram. It's Counseling with Mr. B, spelled all the way out. Counseling with Mr. B. And like every week, I try to focus on a different mental health topic. So this week, we're talking about self care. And I may actually spend a little bit longer on that because it's really important. So the
Please
way
do.
that I relate is I put posts, stories, reels, TikTok, those little mini videos and things like that. But I try to
Mhm.
make it relatable so people walk away with something. And so I literally just recorded one right before it got on this. But like it was about accepting yourself and not comparing yourself to someone else. And those small little things can reach a lot of people if you actually do it. So follow my Instagram page, Counseling with Mr. B, and keep up with me.
Yeah, no, they're really good. And even like your kids can watch it. Like
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, he does it really well. So it's not just like for adults, it's for kids. And
Mhm.
like, what are your triggers? And then, he
Yep.
kind of goes through what they are. So they might be like, huh, what's a trigger? And he, breaks it down
Mhm.
for you.
Yep.
So yeah, so follow him, guys. But thank you so much, Boo, for being here again.
Of
This was
course. This
really,
was
really great.
fun.
Yeah, there were so many gems dropped. Like, for the adults and the kids. This is supposed to be
Yeah.
just about the kids, but we got y'all too. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, no, I'm about to get into my wrap up, but thanks, Boo. I just love John. Don't you just love him? But no, I mean, again, the episode really wasn't even supposed to go that way. It was really supposed to be about, maybe recognizing some signs and grief in your children, or some ways to help them cope. But that's just not the way that it went. Like, and it's supposed to go the way it's supposed to go for a reason. I think it went really well. And I think, we just dove deep into some topics. And yeah, he's probably going to come back, because I feel like there's so many things that were unanswered, and so many questions that can be asked, that maybe I didn't even ask. But we were able to just, talk about so many things. So I hope you got some really, really good gems from that. I hope that you were able to write some things down if you do have kids, maybe some signs to look for, or some things for yourself, maybe some childhood trauma that you didn't know was there, and are able to recognize it now, and to grow from that and learn from that, right? And so I really do hope, like it helps you in some sense. because I just love John and I really want you guys to go follow his Instagram. He has some really good reels and TikToks and stuff like that, of just ways to be able to cope and, just all of that. And so, again, I really hope you enjoyed that. But one thing that I really just wanted to emphasize, I don't like my wrap ups to be long these days, but one thing I really did want to emphasize that he said at the end is to just be gentle with yourself. Um, I had to learn that myself, is to be gentle with myself as I was going through the healing process with grief, because grief, again, it's not it doesn't go like this, right? It's just not like that. It's not a lateral thing that happens. It can go here and then here and then here and then here and then here, and just it can just go wherever it needs to go. And so you just have to be gentle with yourself, whether you are trying to heal from your own childhood trauma, or whether you have a child and you are trying to help them in their healing with a childhood trauma, right? Because we're not perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to do things that, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I think it's just the learning process for us all, and having to figure it out and having to do all that. And so just be gentle with yourself in any process when you're going through the grieving, when you're trying to maybe recognize what the um, or pinpoint what it is, the childhood trauma, where it came from, or pinpoint, maybe the childhood trauma, or maybe your child going through something, maybe trying to get them in therapy. Like, just be gentle and say, you know what, like, okay, today I did a good job. Like, today I recognize that I do have trauma from having some emotional neglect happen to me. And it wasn't necessarily the fault of my parent, because they just didn't know. But that doesn't mean that it didn't affect me, right? That doesn't mean that you're letting them off the hook. It just means that it affected me. And now I recognize that it affected me. And so now I'm going to take the steps necessary as an adult to be able to do that. Or I see that my child has been sleeping. Now I'm being more cognitive to say, you know what? I have noticed my child is sleeping a lot more. I noticed that they're being way more snippy, and I just thought it was puberty or them growing up, but maybe I need to like be more present and have conversation with them and not be on Instagram all the time, or you know what I mean? Like, but either way, whatever it is, just be gentle with yourself, because again, nobody's perfect. We're all trying to figure it out. Even, especially with this grieving thing, it's such a it's you just go through it, right? Like, I can never, like, obviously I give my advice on it, right? But you have to go through it to kind of understand the process of it. And I can explain the process of it, of course. And, that's why I'm here, is to help kind of ease the process and say, like, hey, what you're going through is okay. But, it's just one of those things that, you know, every day is going to be different. Every minute can be different, especially at the beginning of whatever your grieving process is, right? It's going to be different. And to just acknowledge that you're not going to get it right every time, but you're not going to get it wrong, because there's no right way to grieve. There's no wrong way to grieve. There's always healthy and unhealthy ways and coping mechanisms, right? But there's no right and wrong way. So you're not going to be perfect when you're doing it. You're not going to be perfect trying to figure it out. And as I always say, be kind to yourself and give yourself grace, because if you don't, who will? I hope you all enjoyed that episode. You can actually listen to This Too Shall Suck podcast, a fresh perspective on grief, on all listening platforms. And make sure, if you're not already, following me on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook at This Too Shall Suck podcast. And you can hit my website as well. Learn more about your girl, Lauren Denise, at www.thistooshallsuckpodcast.com. If you love this episode, if it resonated with you, make sure you hit that like button. Let me know, because I know I need to make more videos like that for you. And meet me in the comments. Let's talk about it. I love talking to y'all. And make sure you definitely hit that little bell, that little subscribe button. Thank you guys as always, and I'll see you on the next episode.